Hi, this is Deana with the Matadoras. As you know by now, Lizzie and I were married to the same sexually addicted narcissist. And we've told our story conglomerately, but now I'd like to tell my story individually because I wanted to go into a little more detail about what it was like to be married for 27 years to someone with a severe sexual addiction. Obviously, this short video doesn't cover all of the things that I went through, but it kind of gives you a good idea in a nutshell of what it was like, and maybe you could see some similarities in your own story or someone that you know and you're trying to help. So I was 17 years old, and I met the person that Lizzie and I now call Rex, RX, and he went to my high school. He was a couple years older than me. I never knew him in high school because, he was the popular jock and I was the not popular nerd. So we didn't know each other, but I was almost out of high school when I met him, and he'd been out for a couple of years. And I met him at a church function, ironically. Even though he didn't go to church, he kind of appeared at this church because he was bored one night. And immediately he swept me off my feet. He was just so charming, and anything that I would talk about, he would claim that he did the same thing or loved the same thing. He said he was a Christian. He said he was a virgin. Of course, as a 17-year-old Christian girl, I was looking for that in a man. And I was like, oh my goodness, this guy, he's the one. And immediately I was hooked. So we married within 3 months. I would never recommend that to anyone. Do not marry a person before at least a year. It takes a long time before signs can really be completely investigated and found out to be true, or maybe just things that aren't true. But within weeks, even before we married, within weeks after dating, these red flags started popping up. I had a girl in high school come to me and say that she'd been dating him even while he and I started dating. And she said, he just recently dumped me and it was because of you. And, he was seeing me up until that point. And there were just really strange things. There was a rumor in town about people seeing him holding hands with another girl. And I even heard a rumor that he had been dating a married woman in another town where he went to college. All kinds of things, weird things that don't normally happen in a normal relationship. So if you're in a relationship and there just seems to be a lot of strange things that have been told or things that have been happening or things that you've seen, really pay attention to those, because when you talk to the narcissist, they will tell you an amazing story, an amazing excuse, or they'll just flat out say that that's crazy and that's never happened. But you'll see a pattern after a while where things will keep happening. We married in the 3 months, and in the first 6 months was absolute perfection. It couldn't have been any better. And then things started getting strange. He would show up late, hours after he should have been at work. And then if I questioned him, then he at one point yelled at me and said he was buying me flowers and how ungrateful was I and how terrible that was. Then I found out the flower shop wasn't even open that late. There was also another incident where I found these strange phone numbers on our telephone. And this is the 1980s. It was a $900 phone bill. When I called one of those numbers, the recording that came on was absolutely disgustingly horrific. I couldn't believe that this is what he was listening to. And of course, he said that a neighbor kid must have come in and done it, which is hilarious, that a neighbor would come into our house and make those phone calls. So that happened. I couldn't prove it. He claimed he didn't do it. I was very young and very naive. That didn't help. Finally, with these weird incidents that kept occurring and these weird absences, I just threatened to leave and I just said, I'm done. At that point, he finally confessed that he had some sort of a problem. I don't even know if he called it a problem. I think he just talked about how he did these things that he didn't understand. He blamed it on the fact that when he was just a young boy, he found some pornography under his grandpa's bed, and he felt like that just kind of got him started. So he admitted that him being absent from home was him trolling around our small town looking for women to give him sexual favors. And strangely enough, as long as he found the right kind of woman and talked to her the right kind of way, he seemed to be very successful in getting these sexual favors. And of course, I was completely floored. I didn't know what to do with this information. I didn't know what this was. I went and sought counsel. We went to our pastor and his wife, who seemed to kind of insinuate that, that he and his wife had had some challenges as well, and that they almost divorced, but they didn't, and that they committed everything to God and God helped them and everything was okay now. And they had this wonderful marriage, this wonderful family. And they kind of gave him a little finger wagging and, you shouldn't be doing that anymore. And so, of course, I didn't know. I mean, we prayed in the pastor's office. We had that conversation. My ex was crying and sobbing and just ashamed and seemed very repentant and didn't want to be this man. And so it seemed that he was on a good path, and it seemed that he was going to change his life. Well, it wasn't too much longer later that I found out from a family member that he had actually been arrested in high school for indecent exposure. The police had come to our high school and arrested him. And he would be pretending to pee somewhere in public and hoping that people would look at him. And again, he was like maybe 14, 15 years old, and he was doing these kinds of things. I also found out that he would go on school field trips because he was big into sports, and he would actually get a prostitute in the hotel room when the rest of the team was out practicing. Things that teenagers don't usually think to do. But again, I, would go and get counsel, psychologist or a pastor or someone that I trusted. And again, I was told there was a lot of hope. He could do better. He would go get counseling. He would just do whatever it took. He'd be reading books. He'd be going to men's groups, desperate to get better. Finally, when I was about to leave for good, I found out that I was pregnant. And by the time my baby was just a few weeks old, there were just too many things surrounding all these situations. And I left. I moved to another city. Now my ex is threatening to commit suicide. He is distraught and depressed. He's calling everybody that I know. They are calling me. They are saying he is so distraught. He needs you. You can't do this to him. He's going to get help. It was love bombing. It was flying monkeys. It was complete manipulation. And it took a while, but eventually when he agreed to commit himself to counseling, I went back. Because again, I'm getting on high authority from people that I trusted, especially people in the church for the most part, that this was a good man, this was a Christian man, and God was going to help. God was going to clean this up. As long as he really wanted that, that was going to happen. So, honestly, I just put my trust in God and the people that I trust. However, this became a pattern. It sometimes went away or at least I didn't see anything for years. It could be 2 or 3 years before I knew anything was happening. And I had a lot of peace and things seemed to come together at those points. We had more children. We ended up having 4 children. And there were times that things were just really good. But it seemed like, looking back, there was this pattern every couple of years when I would catch something else. At one point, I even walked into our small apartment in the middle of the day because I had gotten off work early, and my ex was there on the floor with a phone book doing, you can only imagine what, making phone calls to women. He was actually making obscene phone calls to women. And again, I didn't even know what to do with that. I didn't know. So finally at that point, he got a diagnosis from a psychologist that he had a sexual addiction. And the psychologist said, there is hope for you. You can get counseling. You can get therapy. You can get better, but you need to commit yourself. So naturally, he went to the church. He went to the pastor who knew him and loved him and thought a lot of him, and, started doing counseling and going to men's groups and really committing himself to those things. And again, it seemed like everything would clear up and get better and gave me all kinds of hope. But again, I was really putting my hope in God. And I think that's where, especially if you're a woman or a man of faith, things can get really confusing when you put your hope in God that if you do what you're supposed to do and you obey the Lord and not ditch your marriage vows. And again, I'm not condoning necessarily this thinking because it can turn toxic. This was my thinking. You do everything right. You pray for them. You pray for your marriage. You pray for your family. You stay in church. You grow spiritually, and this thing will drop off. And that is truly what I believed. Finally, it ended up that he had an actual affair. Before, it had been strip clubs, illicit phone calls, just weird sexual encounters, but nothing personal, no affairs, no love. But finally, he actually had an affair. And we had been separated for a bit. He ended up meeting a woman and having an affair with her. I caught it. Ironically and crazy, I caught it. Happened to call when he happened to be with her, even though he was supposed to be staying with his sister. And yeah, this was a real woman. And I was absolutely horrified. And it was weird how devastating that was compared to just, not just, but virtual kind of relationships, virtual encounters, I will call it, that don't mean anything, that are just all physical. But then when someone actually is real and your ex is like comparing you to them, because in order to get her to be with him, he had to tell her, and he did tell me this, that we were on the rocks, that I didn't, love him, that I was a terrible person, that I was divorcing, all this stuff. Said horrible things about me so that she felt sorry for him, and there it went. And he ended up at that point going into a rehab center for 6 months. He said, this is it. I'm not going to be this person anymore. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And at that point, our kids were young teenagers. So we'd been married probably at that point about 20 years, 22 years. And 6 months later, it felt like he came out a new man. It felt like he was humble, and he apologized for the first time ever and said, I am so sorry I did this to you. I can't believe I did these things to you. Really, really seemed to have a grip on all the damage and hurt that he had done to me and our children. And it seemed like we were going to be on this amazing path. We had planned to start helping other couples that are in these situations, helping men. He was starting a group for men to help them in these situations. It was going to be one of those epic, God is going to turn the situation into the most amazing ministry. And I was so thrilled about it. But several years went by. The kids moved out. We were just the two of us, and we ended up moving out of state. I mean, he was just doing fantastic. It was wonderful. For the first time, I just felt relieved, and I had faith in who he was and what he was doing and where he was going. And I had faith in our future, with our kids moving out, and we had this sweet time where one of our daughters was going to get married soon. And everything we'd worked so hard for and gone through so much pain for was now coming to this wonderful fruition. Not so fast. My friend came to me before we moved because he got a transfer out of state to a new and better job. And before we moved, she said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I feel very strongly that God has spoken to my heart. This is going to happen again. He is going to do this again. And when he does, please make sure that you have a community around you to support you. And I was angry. I was so angry with my friend because I just could not, first of all, I couldn't believe it. Things had been so good for so long and everything seemed so different. And I suspected nothing. Of course, I hadn't checked up on him in a long time because I felt so comfortable. But I really thought that she just said that and she just misheard, and I was really angry. Well, we move out of state, and less than a year later, guess what? We are driving near Ventura Beach, and we're having this wonderful honeymoon little vacation. This random phone call comes on his cell phone. Of course, he's driving, so I pick it up. I say hello. And I could tell this, whoever this was, they were outside. You could hear road noise and a little bit of wind. And so I was like, hello, hello, hello. And pause. Then this woman's voice comes on and she said, who is this? And by the way, the number was a blocked number. And I said, no, 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 no. You called me. Who's this? And she said, no, I want to know who this is. And I said, no, who are you? And she hung up. And immediately that sick, nauseating pit of your stomach feeling that you get, right, ladies and gentlemen, anytime you know in your heart of hearts that something is wrong, something is very wrong, you get that sick feeling. Well, there it was. The same sick feeling I'd had 1,000 times before, there it was. And I looked over at him and I said, maybe you should explain this call. And he immediately got that look on his face that he always got when something was really wrong and he was about to get caught. But he said, hey, I haven't done anything for you to accuse me after all this time and after all the things I've done to get things right. I have not done anything. This was not me, really kind of like, how dare you? How dare you even accuse me of this? And I said, okay, that's fine. We went on our merry way and we had a wonderful weekend. And then when we came home and he went to work, I went ahead and started doing some investigation. So it didn't take too long to uncover a Gmail account that I didn't even know he had. And ironically, this Gmail account, he used his rehab password, which was really dumb. So at that moment, I didn't find out who the woman was, but I did find deleted emails that were still in the deleted box where he had gone on trips with my father. Actually, he and my father loved to go to sports games and all kinds of award ceremonies for sports. And he would meet my father at the hotel, let's say 1:00 check-in time. But Rex would get there early and he would get prostitutes off Craigslist. And he was meeting prostitutes right before he would meet my dad and fly out with him for a trip. So what I discovered was this had been happening about a year prior, and all the way up until this point in time. And that was exactly the time 1 year prior when my friend told me those things, which was really fascinating to me. So at that point, you guys, and I always say this, and I've heard this from several other women too, and men, sometimes when the time is right to leave, you just know. You just know. I was not agonizing. I was not emotional. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was not terrified. I was just calm and resolute and done. And so done. Like someone burned it to the ground and there's nothing but ashes. Done. So when he came home from work, I showed him what I found and I said, I'm done. And of course, he started the whole thing again. He started the sobbing. He started the confessing. He confessed that he was having an affair with a woman at work. And obviously that's probably who called. But he would do the confessing only because he learned in the past that when he confessed, it would make me come back because it made me feel like he wasn't lying anymore. I didn't care what he had said at that point. It didn't matter to me. He even called me one time on the way to work during this separation. He was hysterical. He was screaming. He was sobbing. He said, I'm driving off a cliff right now. I'm done. I can't. And suicide threats were very common with him. But at this point, it did terrify me because I knew how desperate he was. And I realized that he couldn't push any of my buttons. And he was actually starting to completely panic and break down. So I was afraid that he would be serious this time. And I tried to talk him out of it. But he threatened that he was going to drive off a cliff that very minute. And he was on his way to work. And he then hung up the phone so that I couldn't call him. And, didn't end up doing it. Didn't end up following through. It was a typical threat that was empty. But I just want to say leaving and finding my new life was hard. It's hard. But you know what? It was the most incredible thing I ever did, because it's now 11 years later and I have the most incredible husband, children, blended family, grandchildren. It is absolutely beautiful. And I did trust God all the way through this relationship. Am I saying that, God wanted me to be with this dysfunctional person, that God wanted me to never leave? That I can't tell you or answer any of those questions. I can tell you that if I hadn't left when I did, when I had that incredible peace that it was time to go, I would not have met my current husband. I would not have met my co-partner, Lizzie, right now, who was Rex's second wife. Because if I had left him when I wanted to, I would have never moved to California, and I would have never left him in California, and he would have never met Lizzie and married her. So it's just crazy the way that life turns out. So this is to give you all hope. And I have to thank God for calming me during the storm, helping me maneuver it, giving me these tools now and this wisdom to help other women and to help them relate and know they're not alone, and helping you know that you're not crazy and that this is a very hard situation, and knowing what to do is extremely difficult. So please hang in there. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself, because breaking up a family is never easy. And maybe you're not going to be breaking up your family. Maybe your person will actually get some help and stay committed. But I will tell you, try not to let them play the game, okay? Where they tell you they're getting help, they tell you that they're getting better, and they stop after a couple months. Because that creates the pattern of deceit. When they tell you they're getting help and they tell you they're moving forward, and then they get bored of it after a couple months and they just go back to being themselves. They're not serious or invested. Serious and invested people are going to get into counseling, and if they have to stay in it for the rest of their life, they will. If they have to stay into a Sex Addicts Anonymous group for the rest of their life, they will. They will do anything it takes because they love you. And when you hurt, they hurt. Somebody who does not love you, they will not hurt when you hurt. They might pretend they do. They might pretend they're sorry, but they do it again and again and again and devastate you. That's not love. I don't care how much they say they love you. I don't care what nice things they do for you. If they keep ripping your soul out and stomping it on the ground, they don't love you. They love themselves. Because anyone who loves you is going to do whatever it takes to get better. They're not going to put you through this. All right. I hope this has helped somebody out there. Thank you so much for listening. God bless, and you're not alone.